This story was written by M.K. Matrix. I always advise those looking to do clinical trials for money to reconsider if they have other options. They don't pay well for what you have to go through, and the side effects can be killer. Usually, whatever we're testing gives patients a headache or mild nausea, but occasionally, it can get worse than that. Nothing I've ever seen in my few years of monitoring trials was ever as bad as what happened last week, though. In fairness, I did try to warn them. Every single board meeting, I'd bring up how we needed to stop cutting costs on lab rat testing and development. The higher-ups always had an ego, though. They would always tell me that our scientists knew what they were doing, and I've only been here 3 years, and the other supervisors have been here 10+ years, and none of them complain. It was beyond frustrating, and I knew it would eventually blow up in our faces. I didn't think that it would be something of this magnitude, though. It started last Monday. We were beginning the clinical trials of a new heart disease drug called alasil. It was to be advertised as a breakthrough in treatment of the disease, notably having noticeable effects on the body within just a few days. That's pretty fast for any drug to kick in, and I was admittedly curious to see if it would hold true. To my knowledge, it had only had 1 round of testing prior, and this was the first bout of human tests. The results of the rat tests were classified to us supervisors, which was standard procedure, so I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was quite a varied group of subjects. The ages ranged from 12 to 80, and the severity of cases ranged from early signs of the disease to people with not long left to live. Every single one of them was there with the same goal, though: to advance treatment for the one burden they all shared. It was a sentiment I could get behind, and one that summarized why I chose to be a clinical trial supervisor. This specific trial would be a week long. We would provide patients with rooms to stay in and 3 meals a day. The other 2 supervisors would take the 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and the 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shifts respectively, and I would have the overnight shift. I didn't want to work nights, but it was my turn to, and everyone else suffered through it before me, so fair is fair. The drug was expected to kick in on the 3rd day, meaning that we had to monitor the patient's improvement throughout the week. It sounds simpler than it is, and that's because I haven't taken patient behavior into account. In any given clinical trial at our company, patients sign a contract stating that they can't leave until the testing period is over, with clauses for medical evacuation and such. This isn't legal in the slightest, but it's how the higher-ups say we should do it, and they hire plenty of security to make damn sure that it gets done. People don't like feeling entrapped, though, and patients often pick fights and get physical if they're told they can't leave. It's the toughest part of any trial, and for a drug that was apparently this monumental, we were expecting even worse behavior, especially if it proved to be a failure. The first night went pretty smoothly. I was treated with respect by most of the patients, and those that needed me for something never got snippy. As expected, we didn't see any negative signs, nor any change to the patient's vitals and conditions in general. The same went for the 2nd day, although one odd thing did happen around 4 a.m. My call button went off, directing me to one of the rooms on the second floor. The patient staying in that room was an older lady, mid-60s, with a more severe case of heart disease. She was a sweetheart, though, and I was immediately concerned that something had happened, so I made my way upstairs. Upon entering her room, nothing looked out of the ordinary. Her bedside lamp was on, and she was sitting upright in bed, looking at me. I walked to her side of the bed and knelt down to be at eye level with her. "Miss Margaret, what's going on? Are you okay?" "Where are my fingers?" I was confused, to say the least. I looked down at her hands, and she seemed to have the usual amount of digits. I couldn't say that I'd seen this before, so I thought the best course of action would be to reassure her that everything was okay. That's always a good place to start. "Miss Margaret, your fingers are right here." "I can't see them. Can you make them come back?" I lifted her bony hand and counted her red-tipped fingers in front of her. She looked at me with wide eyes and smiled. "Oh, there they are. Thank you, dear." I was unsettled and immediately racked my brain to try to figure out what could be going on. Was she hallucinating? Quite possibly. I've seen it before, though not to the extent that one thinks that they're missing body parts. Could this be some sort of undiagnosed issue completely unrelated to alasil? Also possible. I decided that I'd consult with the other supervisors when I saw them again, and put it into my report. As long as she wasn't in any present danger, there was nothing I could do for her. I didn't start to panic until the next day. Throughout the night, I got 16 calls. There were 30 total patients under our watch, so over half of them were experiencing negative effects from the drug. That isn't the unsettling part, though. What scared me was that every call was the same. I would walk into the room, and nothing would seem out of the ordinary, except the patient would be panicking. Toes, fingers, tongues. Every patient claimed that something different was missing. Of course, nothing was actually gone, but it seemed that they'd actually lost all sensation in those areas. After the first 4 calls, I contacted the emergency doctor on duty, who was staying in a room in another wing of the facility. He was irritated that I was calling so early into my shift, but I frankly wasn't having it, and told him to zip it and come downstairs. Together, we examined all the patients, and came to the consensus that we would have to call an emergency meeting the next day. The doctor insisted that I should take the next night off and get some rest after what I'd been dealing with, and he would advocate for the immediate end of the trial. I shouldn't have agreed. I received a call after the meeting, informing me that the trials would continue as they found no evidence that any of the patients were in any danger. At this point, I was just about done with not being listened to, and spoke up. "I can't do this anymore, Jim. These people are clearly in danger. They think they're losing limbs, and you don't see the danger in that?" "It's all in their heads. We're on the verge of releasing a breakthrough drug here. If these are the side effects, we can't do it. It goes against everything we're trying to do." "We can't replace you on such short notice. You're going to stay, or I'm going to make sure you never work in this field again. This discussion is over." My phone clicked, and I was furious. I couldn't afford to be blacklisted from work, but I wasn't willing to watch people suffer to keep my job. I decided that I would return to work, but every time something bad happened, I would call the emergency doctor. If I couldn't stop the tests, I could at least keep a close eye on the patients. The next night was when everything finally collapsed. Every single person had some sort of problem. One man dragged himself through the hall with just his arms, screaming that his legs were missing. Another had to be restrained because he kept bashing his head into the concrete floor, claiming that his ears and eyes had vanished. The worst part, though, was the things that all of them said. They all claimed that something was coming to take them away, piece by piece. Something who'd been appearing in their sleep for days, taunting them as they laid there helplessly. I had to call the local police department and beg them to send officers over to the building to help me, struggling not to cry as I did so. What could this drug be doing to these people that they were having this violent of a reaction? It had to be the medication. It was the only common denominator. When the police arrived, they didn't help me. As I walked down the hall to open the door for them, everything behind the door suddenly went dark. I picked up the pace and tried pulling the door open, but it wouldn't budge. As I desperately knocked on it, shouting for a response, a calm but stern voice responded to me. It was the police chief, who informed me that the building had been ordered into quarantine. Hearing this, I backed up from the door and barely heard another word that he said. Something was seriously wrong, as I already knew, but it was apparently to the scale that they didn't want anyone leaving. I was under strict orders to stay behind the desk and wait until medical professionals arrived. I was perfectly fine with that. After all, I felt like I was gonna vomit, and I'd rather be close to a trash can. But it wasn't easy to stay put. The screaming coming from the rooms only got louder as I obsessively checked the clock. The pounding on the walls and doors was feverish, like someone trying to escape a fire. But then it stopped. It all went quiet, and I looked up from my hands in shock, with tears streaming down my face. And that's when my call button went off. The call was coming from the outside buzzer, so I figured that the hazmat team was there. I answered it and waited for someone to talk. "Hello?" There was nothing but the sound of breathing. "Hello?" "I've arrived." The sentence itself wasn't inherently creepy, but I still felt sick. It wasn't the voice of the police chief, or of someone that I recognized at all. I cleared my throat and responded in an admittedly shaky voice. "Who is this?" "I am going to enter." After hearing that, I clicked the receiver off. As I weakly stood back up from my desk, I thought about what the voice had said. As I pondered, I saw the outside door creak open in my peripheral vision. The sound of flesh slapping against the floor echoed through the hall as all other noise faded from my mind. It wasn't a man in a hazmat suit, nor a cop, nor a doctor, nor anything I've ever seen before. Slowly crawling towards me was something so utterly vile that being blind would have been preferable to seeing it. It traveled on 4 of what can most closely be described as legs that hung loose with gangrenous skin and trembled every time they hit the floor. Its head dragged across the floor as if its neck was snapped long ago and it healed in that position. Its piercing eyes stared at me, one a soothing blue and the other a striking brown. Its figure looked like body parts that had been hastily stitched together in hopes that they resemble something living. As it drew breath, it grumbled in an almost human-like way. I struggled to process what was happening and slowly took a step backwards towards the front desk. I sat there and stared at it as it moved towards me. The building was sealed. There was no way out. But before it could reach me, it stopped and spoke in the same voice I'd heard over the intercom.
You are afraid. Yes. Fear not. I am not here for you.
I pressed my back against the desk, looking at the creature through my knees. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. It raised a red-tipped finger and pointed at me.
We will meet again. Yes, I know it. For you, there are still many things to see.
I closed my eyes as tears welled up in them. I could tell that the lights turned off, whether solely above me or in the facility as a whole, as the hushed humming suddenly stopped. I opened my eyes and prepared to be faced with horror. They found me passed out on the floor inside of the office. My condition wasn't the horrifying part, unfortunately. In each of the patient's rooms, all that remained was a corpse. One body was missing his legs. Another lacked eyes and a tongue. Miss Margaret was missing her fingers. I've been locked in my cell for days now. They're saying that I did it. They say that I killed them all, and there was no monster. But worst of all is the fact that the company is testifying against me, saying that I went crazy while working and snapped under the pressure. They said that it had to be me, because there was no way any of the patients in the placebo group would be hallucinating.